Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. While we're waiting for the rest of our guests to join, would you please go ahead and put your name and maybe where you're from in the chat? We will be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A throughout the duration of the webinar today. We hope for a high level of interactivity. We would love to hear your thoughts, questions, and if you'd like to dig a little bit deeper, there will be an opportunity for questions, and then we'll also have our speakers' contact information at the end of this, so you can feel free to contact them directly to learn more about what they're talking about. So if you would, please enter your name and your location in the chat while we wait just a couple more minutes for everyone to get on board. Okay, so welcome to today's webinar on mission-driven leadership, staying the track and inspiring growth. In this session, we're going to explore what it means to lead with purpose, remain steadfast in the face of challenges, and inspire meaningful growth within educational communities. We have an incredible discussion ahead led by two highly respected leaders in the field of education. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our guests. First off, we have Dr. Chris Blair, the founder and executive director of the Alabama Black Belt Children's Region and the executive director of the Alabama Alliance for Black School Educators. Dr. Blair has been recognized for his outstanding leadership, including being named the 2020 Alabama District IV Superintendent of the Year and a finalist for Alabama State Superintendent of the Year. Joining him is Dr. Henderson Lewis Jr., the founder and principal consultant of Vision Forward Global, and an assistant professor of educational leadership at Louisiana State University. Dr. Lewis is a highly accomplished educational leader who has been recognized as the 2020 and 21 Louisiana Region III Superintendent of the Year, and is a multiple-time honoree as the Louisiana School Board Association's Distinguished School Board Member of the Year. We are truly honored to have both of these exceptional leaders with us today. Just a few notes before we get started. The session will be recorded and shared with all participants and registrants. We encourage you to engage with our speakers by submitting your questions in the chat or Q&A box. And if you stay tuned at the end, there'll be a brief Q&A session. Now let's dive in. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Blair and Dr. Henderson Lewis Jr. Gentlemen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you and our listening audience and to engage around this very important topic today, which is mission-driven leadership, staying the course and inspiring growth. So we're excited. And also I'm excited to be able to join my colleague, my brother in the field, as I would call him, Dr. Henderson Lewis. And again, I'm just excited and I can't wait to get into the meat of our presentation. Dr. Lewis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blair and Robert, for the introduction. I'd like to take this time also to welcome each and every one of you to our webinar today. I believe we have superintendents, school district staff, school leaders, and other dedicated professionals who work tirelessly to ensure that our students across this country are able to thrive. So again, we appreciate each and every one of you for joining today. One thing that we know is true. Educators have always faced challenges. So if we're thinking about a professional who may be in their 30th year or someone who may just be in their 5th year as an educator, we all have experienced challenges along the way. If we even go back to the last 5 years, from pivoting to virtual learning in 2020, to overcoming post-pandemic learning loss and navigating in this particular school year, current budgetary hurdles. One thing we know is true. Our leaders, our educators, work day in and day out with unwavering commitment to our teachers, our students, and our families. But we also know in driving and overcoming challenges, if we're not careful, we can easily lose sight to what truly matters, supporting and inspiring our teachers, our students, and our families. As you can see on the screen right now, we have a very famous quote that I believe everyone on this webinar today have seen multiple times. But each time I hear it, I see it, it resonates with me, and it's an opportunity for self-reflection. Dr. Maya Angelou says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Her quote is the cornerstone of our mission-driven leadership conversation that we're going to have today, and the lasting impact of our efforts in measuring by two things. When we think about our leaders and our educators, it's being measured by the care and the support that we extend to our school community. Just to set the stage for today, today's session is a reminder and a refocus, rather than in most cases, new information. Think about it. If you think for a moment of a long road trip, when you start veering off course, you have to pause, you have to realign, and continue towards your destination. Our goal here today is to help you to recalibrate your focus and stay true to your mission-driven objective, whether you're a superintendent, district staff, school-based principal, or someone, a teacher, or someone who is supporting the educational process in a school system. So, today, as you can see, this conversation is going to be divided into three areas. The three pillars of mission-driven leadership: people-centered leadership, recognizing our educators, our administrators, and students are our most vulnerable assets; purpose-driven actions, grounding us today in decisions in data and research and understanding why those two things are so important. And finally, our third pillar for today is sustainable impact, fostering resilient systems for long-term success. Now it's time for you to actually do a little participation. So as we dive into people-centered leadership, we want you to begin today by reflecting. Think about a teacher, mentor, or leader who has had a significant impact on you as a student. I know for some of you, it has been long. It's been 33 years for me, so I do understand. But we need you to think back to someone that actually had that very significant impact on you. What did they do that made you feel seen, valued, or supported? And what we're going to ask each and every one of you to do is to participate by sharing your reflections in the chat function at this time. So think about it for a moment, and let's see all these wonderful things that teachers and mentors and leaders have, how they have impacted each and every one of us on this webinar here today.
Getting a lot of good feedback in here. Continuing to follow up, checks on progress even into today, helped me believe the things that I could do when I didn't think I could, always challenged me and encouraged me Really looks like a continuous thread here about that caring support and follow through and truly showing that true empathy for one another.
Thank you, Robert. All critical attributes of mentors, leaders, those who help not only our students in our schools today, but as you can see from the information that Robert has shared, that it actually has not only impacted those of us on this webinar today, but has also probably led us to the work that we're doing today as well. And so as we think about this first area that we're diving into, we want to look at it in 4 different areas today. Creating positive, inclusive learning environments, understanding and supporting the whole student, tailoring education to meet the individual needs, and building strong relationships between educators and students. And I'm going to transition to Dr. Blair, who will take us through creating an inclusive learning environment.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I'm excited about some of the statements I see in the chat, which really parallels with what we're talking about around how did you feel as a learner? So in this first pillar, we really want to remind ourselves of how critical it is to create those inclusive learning environments. And in the time that we're in now regarding what words we can and cannot say around how we involve students, our practices still have to be where they're included. I'm reading one of the statements in the chat, and it says that the teachers learned my name and made connections. But that is so critical in terms of how do you enhance student engagement? You know who students are. And in that, the first pillar really talks about this piece around once you engage students in an inclusive learning environment, whereas our participants said, where the teachers know your name and make connections, research is telling us that we will improve those academic performances. And it goes deeper. It says that once we have those teaching practices that are for every child in the classroom, no matter what level they are, student participation increases, that engagement increases, and as a result, we have higher academic outcomes. And next, we think about this sense of belonging. I too can resonate around that. I read another comment in the chat where it says that I was pushed and I felt like I was included. Well, this enhanced sense of belonging is where we know we remind ourselves that as we think about where we are, how do we, as leaders, motivate and inspire our educators in the classroom to ensure that there's a sense of belonging, that students feel like they are a part of that class, they're seen, they're understood, and they're heard, and they're empowered, meaning that they have a growth mindset from that educator. We have the growth mindset, and with those affirmations, as well as including students' examples in the classroom, having that where culture, climate, that they belong in that classroom, we know that research is telling us again, with this sense of belonging, that students become more confident as learners, they develop agency regarding their content area, and we know grit will improve. And it's very powerful to build that sense of community around that sense of belonging. And then lastly, this piece of creating an inclusive educational environment centers around those retention rates. It's critical now that because in a lot of our states, we have laws that as of a 3rd grade reading retention, we have laws that are around some of us with math. If you don't achieve a certain math level, you get retained. And we also just have retention at every grade level. But looking at that, we want students to matriculate through from pre-K through what I call year 14, meaning that our high school students get some of that college experience, either a 2-year degree by the time they graduate. But we know research is telling us that if we have these inclusive environments, much as what our participants just said in the chat, where they were pushed, taught me my first lesson, had me feel like I belong in the class, then we know those practices improve academics, hence decreasing that retention rate. So it's so beneficial to us just to remind ourselves as we go throughout our schools. Some of you are on central office level, network levels, and some of you are in the school building level as administrators. We have to continually remind ourselves and practice forward how we create these inclusive leadership team environments, but also we're creating these inclusive environments in the classroom. So it's just exciting, again, to think about that I can read through this chat and it resonates with me, all of the things that I would do as a learner to help create that sense of belonging so that the learners beyond our age, or they get to age 12, 13, 14, or they say 20 years ago, I had an educator that made me feel this way in the class, and hence I improved my academic performance. I had the sense of belonging, and I wasn't retained or I matriculated as I should throughout my grade levels. So it's just exciting. So Dr. Lewis, I'll turn this back over to you.
Yes, and as Dr. Blair was sharing about creating an inclusive learning environment, if we're not careful, we can address all the things that Dr. Blair just mentioned. But our next component of this pillar says understanding and supporting the whole child. So as we talk about the retention rates, for example, if we're not supporting the whole child, we know that we will not be able to retain the number of students that we need to retain to be able to get to, as Dr. Blair mentioned, to grade 14. And so as you think about understanding and supporting the whole child, we have to first of all think about how student academic success, how it's closely tied to not only the physical, but also the emotional and social well-being that's provided for each and every student that walks through the door every single day. And as educators, not only do we have to think about the mental health, we also have to think about nutritional opportunities for our students, because we do know many students in our country, the meals that they receive at school are the most nutritious meals that they may receive also in any given day. In addition to that, we must make sure that the academic supports also create an equitable learning environment for our students. Now, many times when we think about wraparound services, we may say, yes, we have counselors, we have social workers, we have other individuals, dean of students who be able to support students that may be having a rough day. We have after school programs, we have tutoring, we have all these things in place. And all those things are very, very critical. But as we think about wraparound support services for our students, we also cannot leave out of the conversation how we are supporting and training teachers, paraeducators, and everyone in a school building and system around what can we do, not only to provide these services, but what are we doing to help to prevent issues before they escalate. When issues escalate, we know what happens. But if we're able to effectively train all personnel to be able to support students, then students have a better chance, as it was just mentioned, as we're trying to keep retention rates of students being in school. It allowed them to not only remain in school, but remain on track academically. Now, as we think about this, the school is not an isolated place. We have to be able to understand the role of local organizations, businesses, nonprofits, all these entities. What's the role that they're going to play in making sure that we are able to support our students and the whole child? Community partnerships, for example, can also address truancy, and actually can go back, chronic absenteeism, mentoring, and we cannot forget about mentoring. We just started in the very first reflection question, what did someone do for you, right? Mentoring has to be a very important component of the work that we do. And then we have to make sure that everyone that is connected to a school or school system, they understand the importance of making decisions, not that are best for adults all the time, making decisions that are best for the students that you're serving. Every student, as we started off today, every student must feel valued, must feel supported, and motivated to attend school regularly, right? If students are not excited and motivated about attending school, they will find every excuse possible not to attend school. And so we have to be able to make sure that as we're leading to make sure it's a student first mindset. And if we can do all these components and have these support services working in tandem with one another, we can reduce truancy. Students can have higher student engagement. And we also can make sure that students have a better chance of succeeding academically and socially, as we mentioned before, around retention rates and actually getting them not only through high school, but off to post-secondary opportunities as well. So understanding the whole child is a major component of what we need to do in order to tailor the education to meet students' individual needs.
Exactly. And as we transition into this next slide, I'm reading another comment, and it basically says here is that in feeling this sense that I belong, the person wrote, I was challenged to become a better student, someone believed in this person, and that they are always grateful. And what we're finding is, as Dr. Henderson says, as we think about the whole child, we have to individualize what we do consistently. And we have familiar strategies that are on this slide, which we know we differentiate instruction. Differentiate instruction comes from a lens of caring. Why do we ensure that every child, their needs are being met based on exceptionality, if the case, based on academic performance, if that's the case? But we do that because we want to ensure that that child knows we care. So when you think about the other bullets on this slide, it still resonates with me as I read through some of the comments that the teacher taught me not to be afraid, encouraged me, made me feel cared. So when we have personalized learning, we're culturally responsive to students. We have flexible grouping. We are leveraging technology and so on, such as providing special populations the support they need. We're empowering student choice. All of these activities, which become strategies that are individualized by learners, creates this sense of belonging in that class, but it also furthers the academic, cultural, emotional, and every type of performance expectation we have for our scholars in the classroom. So it's exciting to me that we have these group of learners, and just this first reflection, I'm calling our audience today learners, but we have this group together because we're lifelong learners thinking about what do we consistently need to do so that my scholars that I'm serving will feel the way that I still feel after, for me, 30-something years ago of being in a classroom. And I'll give an experience before we move on to our next topic. I remember being in a biology class as a 9th grade student, and I had a stomach ache or something was going on. But I had a teacher in that classroom that she was always intuitive to my or any child's personal experiences, and that she used biology to teach us what was happening. So one of the incidents in that classroom is that I had left PE or whatever the class was before, and my stomach, my abdomen area was hurting. And the teacher walked up to me, and I remember her name. It was Mrs. Gaston. She was one of those teachers that when you hug them, you always felt like you belonged when they gave you that welcome to my classroom. So she was that type of teacher. So she took care, and she talked to me about what was possibly happening in my body. She described it as air moving around in my body, causing me some discomfort. She walked to the back. We had the science classroom. She took a glass of hot water that she got out of the sink. I was hot with the little steam looking color on it. And she gave me the water. And she said, drink this water. It'll help you feel better. Well, I drank that water instantly. Probably 2 to 3 minutes later, I could not tell that I had that pain in my body. I give that simple example of that's a teacher that personalized something for me. She leveraged what she had at the time, which was nothing but water. And she explained to me the concept of what that water was all about. So those are the examples that it's on a personal level that we connect with students, but it's also in making sure that we cater and we personalize learning for scholars through all of these ways because we care for them. And when we're doing these things, scholars walk away with that sense of, wow, that teacher cares, or that school cares, or I feel a part of it. And just like the scholars in the classroom, they're happy learners in the classroom. They're happy scholars when they graduate. They remember their alma mater, their high schools, and they are participating in it because they felt this sense of belonging that catered to their needs. So again, we're just reminding ourselves that these things that we constantly do, it keeps us motivated to continue to stay the course so that we are ensuring that we are on track to continue to grow scholars in every way possible. So as we get into our next slide, I just want you to think about this chat that still reminded me of all of these individual catered needs that we have for scholars that make them feel great. And looking at this next topic, it parallels again, building strong relationships between scholars.
Yeah.
I said that
Yes.
earlier. Dr. Lewis, are you there?
Yeah, yes, I was on mute, sorry. and just as we able to see in the chat, I saw a comment from Stacey Ann that says, when I was afraid to teach my first class, she sat with me, wrote my lesson plans, and guided me with all of the lessons. And so even as Dr. Blair was talking about teacher to student, right? This is a teacher to teacher who's also in this moment in my mind becoming a mentor. And so as we think about this next section of building a strong relationship between educators and students, just as this educator has shared in the chat function today of her nervousness about teaching, you know, our students have very similar experiences as well. And so we have to be able to look at, even as we talk about the very first one of establishing trust and respect. Actually, when I was a principal, our core values at my school were grounded in trust, respect, and responsibility. And as a staff, we had to talk about what it meant to have trust, respect, and responsibility. In this case here, trust and respect. But it was not just for how the students would respect us, but also the respect that we have for students. And just because we were grown adults, it did not give us the right to raise our voice, yell at students because they've done something wrong. But the way we worked during that time was when the situation happened and have an opportunity to talk with the student, or sometime as the principal talking with one of my employees, we had to begin the conversation, which one of the three were violated. Because we had to reset and recalibrate ourselves to make sure we knew how to move forward. And so even as we think about our students, if they're really going to thrive, they have to feel safe. They have to be able to feel respected. We also have to have our students where they believe that their teachers listen actively, that the educators show empathy, and there's fairness across the board, right? Those things are very, very important, just as consistent and meaningful interaction. I will say I was old school trained. So for me, some very small things, but every single day. And when I first started teaching, we had 5 classes we taught a day. And so before students would come into class, it was normal practice that you stand by the door and you greet every student as they're walking in your room, checking on their well-being. And then as students are doing work, it's very important for our educators to be able to provide not only feedback to the class, but what type of personalized feedback are you giving to each and every one of your students to make sure, again, your students are feeling valued as well as connected. Sometimes we've heard across this country where there are low expectations for students. You know, certain students, people may feel because they come from a certain neighborhood, and I grew up in an impoverished neighborhood on free and reduced lunch, and so sometimes there are some thoughts about students, what their abilities can be. But we all know that no matter what the starting point for any child that walks through the door of any school, we must hold all of our students at a very high standard. But we just can't do that. We have to not only provide support, we have to provide encouragement. And the third thing we have to do is the resources to make sure that we can support their growth and development. I remember, I heard Dr. Blair say it earlier today. I remember just reflecting on my time as a principal, and we had some visitors in the building. And the visitor asked a very, very simple question. What do you like about your principal? And the student immediately replied, he knows my name. And so again, talk about personalization. Students want to know that they are more than just someone who is showing up and going to classes each and every day, but that they matter and that you can make a connection with each and every one of those students each and every day. Now, not only is it important for us to know our students as individuals, but we know as educators, we are educating very diverse populations across this country. And so we have to create opportunities where all races and backgrounds can be celebrated, to see their identities being brought into the classroom experience throughout the school year. Because what does that do? It creates not only a sense of belonging, but it also is an opportunity to motivate our students. I alluded to this earlier, two-way communication. It cannot be one-way communication. I understand that in schools, we have adults and we have children, but we have to also understand that our job as educators is a training ground. And so if we can go ahead and work with our students and have them to understand that things happen, mistakes happen. In many cases, it's not the end of the world. We're going to deal with the mistakes, but at the same time, we have to be able to build them up. And if there's no two-way communication, I don't know how we can do that. This last area of mentorship and advocacy is a huge area for me. I am currently a professor in one of my areas of research. I spend a lot of time researching mentorship because it's what I do a lot day in and day out of my professional life, as I help to bring those who are coming behind me, preparing them and strengthening them during their educational journey so that they can lead and be able to support our students across this country. And so it's so important for educators to also see themselves as advocates for the students, not just their academics, but their social and emotional needs, because those things will play a very, very critical role in our students' long-term success. So again, today, as we mentioned at the very beginning, it's our opportunity not to necessarily, again, to learn something new, but to understand how we can recalibrate ourselves to not lose sight of what we need to do, because our students who are coming to schools from various backgrounds go through a lot. And if we build strong relationships, as we mentioned earlier, with the counselors, the social work, and all those important other components of supports for our students, they'll be more willing to share what's going on outside of school, so we can help them while they're in school to support them through those issues and concerns that may be impacting their education.
Dr. Lewis, when
Yes.
we talk about creating this kind of a culture, well, we'd love for that to happen organically. A lot of times it just doesn't happen, but we have to, as leaders, emulate and model the correct behaviors for our staff and our faculty to show the type of empathy. How would you, as a new leader, which you're an experienced leader, but how would you go into a new building and how would you start to create a culture that supports every child's learning and every child's well-being across the board as the whole child?
Yes. So even as we think about an individual, and I'll talk from two components, right? So one is a teacher, one's a leader. And even as a new teacher who is coming in to a classroom, if we can provide an educator with the tools to understand what is the vision, what is the mission, and what's the expectation, because what we do know is that those things are translated very, very differently from person to person to person, right? And so we have to understand, number one, what is coming from the organization I'm working for? What do we stand for? And then two, you have to think about what you stand for. So for me as an educator, whether someone was telling me to personalize learning for my students, whether it was telling me to provide feedback to my students, right? Whether it were telling me to be a data-driven teacher, that was just what I brought to the table, right? And so I would say, whether we're talking about a teacher and whether we're talking about a leader who now is overseeing a staff of individuals, and whether it's your first year, as you mentioned, it's really to understand, like, even if it's a principal, if that information is still not coming to you to say that, like even culturally responsible teaching, right? Like, you have to be able to model for your educators, like, this is what this looks like, right? So just like we model for individuals to be able to be effective teachers, we also need to model for individuals like how to implement some of the things that we may be asking our leaders and educators to do in our schools.
Thank you for answering that question.
Good deal. And now let's open up with our second pillar. This is around purpose-driven action. And as Dr. Henderson has stated, and even with that follow-up question from Robert, is that we know that we walk into these buildings, you may be new leader, inexperienced in terms of that new role, but how do you galvanize people to do the work, but also stay focused? So as our mission today is to ensure that we're staying focused, we do that with purpose-driven action, the outcomes, insights, and evidence-based research. So in a few words, as you reflect, will you describe what data-driven decision-making means to you in terms of education? So in our chat again, with reflection, what does data-driven decision-making mean to you, right? And how does that statement connect to your role in shaping student success? So we'll give everyone 60 seconds to reflect on what data-driven decision-making means to you, and what does that statement, how does that statement connect to your role in shaping student success? I see some statements there that every student is an individual, that every student has different needs and learns in different ways. Continuous improvement. Test, teach equals test. Evaluating metrics that show how teachers and students are performing. All students can learn. Good deal. Thank you for those reflections. And we will go back to the chat as we continue on. And thinking about this data-driven success, let's talk about what really, how data really creates an outcome for us, and how we have insights and what evidence we use those as our next steps for practice. So the first thing we consistently do to stay on track and to stay focused is leverage the information to improve educational services. I read earlier in the chat that someone said that the educator allowed, as a student, allowed them to make mistakes. And this piece around improving educational services is around educational research and refining teaching methods. And what we do as practitioners, and sometimes as the leader of the building or the leader of the network, is that we have to allow safe practice. We know that with the partnership approach around, we're all working together, we have to give people an opportunity to refine their practices, refine their praxis. Right? So leveraging that information and data allows us to be objective. It allows us to make sure that we're not making it personal. If we go into a non-judgmental observation zone environment, we're gathering data, we're able to share that back, and we're leveraging that in a way that we're sharing it with the teacher to be reflective, and also pairing that with research so that we can refine those practices to improve the outcome for our students. Secondly, we think about how that it enhances the learning. And when we go in the classrooms, and everyone knows that being an experienced practitioner, or inexperienced even for that level, when you think about what's happening in the classroom, we may see a classroom that could look chaotic, but those strategies that's happening, it could be cooperative grouping. It could be where students are moving about throughout different protocols, going around the room, mapping things, or building things for hands-on activities. But we're demonstrating, but at the end of that activity, or whatever I may call organized chaos, is learning occurring. So with this evidence-based research or outcomes, we're looking for these approaches that strategies are being used and that students are able to reach high academic outcomes because there is high quality research. So we're improving the educational environment so that we're enhancing student learning. The third one talks about data, interpreting that data in a way to identify opportunities for improvement. I said earlier in one of the chat, I read earlier that the scholar was allowed to make mistakes and they learned from those mistakes. So when we see that we have opportunities or gaps It could be gaps in learning where students are missing in class, so there's an attendance issue. It could be gaps in instruction where there are opportunities where the teacher isn't implementing the instructional strategy or framework effectively. So we make adjustments along the way. Just as today, we're resetting our mindset to ensure that we're mission driven, that we're staying on track, and that we're pushing for student growth just by reminding ourselves of these effective practices. So as we find ways of using the outcomes or insights or research, we're doing it also in a way to make that improvement, to identify any gaps with instruction. It could be leadership instruction, as well as student learning, attendance, so on and so forth. And then lastly, we're talking about using the data for ongoing development. I'm a partnership leader. What I mean by that is I use 7 approaches around showing people equality, voice, choice, reciprocity, reflection, this sense of dialogue, that it's a two-way conversation, as we said earlier, and ensure that we're all improving our praxis. So in that, we're always continuously improving for long-term success. We look at these milestones or opportunities that says 30, 60, 90, or whatever your checkpoints are for your strategies, but are we ensuring that what we're putting in place keeps us on track, on focus to meet our goals in the environment as teachers, but also to meet the goals in the environment for our scholars as learners. So we're evolving to ensure that those practices and those policies meet student needs. So it's so important. And again, I can read through this chat and I see all of these statements that resonate with me. One says that data-driven decision-making in education means harnessing the power of data to inform, guide, enhance every aspect of the educational process. And that in a nutshell is almost every one of those 4 bullets that we just talked about. Dr. Henderson, anything you want to add to this slide?
I think it actually leads into our next slide of leveraging data for school improvement. It ties right into this. And all I'm going to say to get started is data, 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 right? It's there, it's everywhere. And even as we think about our school system for a moment, and if you look at, I know we have some superintendents on the call today. And so we know in school systems today, a lot of our superintendents, as we think about the work that they do, there are many metrics that superintendents have to meet each year, if you would, to be able to keep their jobs. But if we take it down from the superintendency down to the school level, things are in some cases very, very different, right? And so as we think about those individuals who work at the district level who may be responsible for a subset of schools, we also have to be able to look and think about what are the other metrics that are being set for those individuals who are responsible for not just supervising, but overseeing those particular schools so that those schools and those students who are attending those different schools have the opportunity to what? Grow academically, right? But in how many central offices across this country we have very robust performance objective for those supervisors who are actually overseeing those individuals who are running the day-to-day school operations. And so we have to be able to think about from the superintendent to those who are directly supervising schools, down to the schools, you know, the principals, the data that's going to be used to look at their effectiveness and see how they're growing school, their particular school. Because at the end of the day, a lot of data conversation for whatever reason, and in the classroom, we know is the most important place in the school. And so there's a lot of information that's always looking at the classroom teacher. But the same expectation that we're asking for our classroom teachers to be data-driven, we have to be data-driven throughout our entire school district, from the superintendent all the way down to the classroom. And so as we know that if we're looking at data and we are leveraging data in real time, it not only allows educators to identify gaps, but once it allows educators to identify a gap, those support individuals who are supporting the educators in the school, the principals who are overseeing the teachers in the school, it allows them to understand what are the supports that we need to tailor professional development at our schools to make sure that our teachers are able to not only understand to unpack the information that's being provided by data, but also the supports that are being put in place to make sure that our educators can meet the needs of those students that they stand before each and every day. And so I really want to bring that out, because it's one thing to talk about leveraging data for school improvement, but it's more than just for the teacher to understand, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, and across this country, and school performance, whether it's letter grades or other metrics of saying how well a school is doing, in schools, we drill down to, okay, understanding this particular teacher or these teachers here, like what's going on, because obviously they're not meeting the mark. And so if we can make sure that, again, we're all in this together for our students, that we have to understand, everybody, how to not only utilize the data, and then even for the Carnegie study, like you have some students in your school that on the traditional path, it works for many and sometimes most, but then you have some students where in this advanced society that we have, they can complete that same subset of work in a very short period of time and get the same gains. And so we have to be able to, we use the word all the time, differentiation of instruction, right? We've heard it for years and years and years, but at the same time, how are we maximizing that in this 21st century to make sure that as we think about the whole child, as we mentioned earlier today, that we're really touching and impacting the whole child as well. And then if we're able to become a data-driven district, a data-driven school, and when I mention this and when I say this, we're not talking about one time. Let's start at the beginning of the school year to understand where the students' starting points, where they are, and that's not carried through until the end of the school year. But when we do this effectively, we're able to not only improve our students' academic performance, but we also are able to improve our educational practices. And we have to be able to really dive down into improving our educational practices as well, because all those things work hand in hand to make sure that our students are not only able to grow, but as a district, as a school system, that we can move to a sustainable impact in that school system. Dr. Blair?
Yes, definitely. And just thinking about this, I was reading a chat comment again, and this leads us into our last pillar. But thinking about what our attendee just said in this, he said, overall data-driven decision-making empowers educators to create a more powerful, dynamic, responsive, and effective educational environment. And that leads to what we want to sustain. So when we think about how we're leveraging data to move forward, the last pillar we want to talk about is this sustainability impact. And what our educator in the chat just said is that we create these dynamic, responsive educational environments. So we build a culture around this sense of sustainability because it's responsive to our scholars. It's responsive to our staff. It's responsive to the community. It's responsive to the economic needs. And we build these systems of sustainability. So another reflection as we move into pillar 3, think about a time when collaboration across different roles in education led to a successful outcome. What made that collaboration effective? So take about 60 seconds again, reread the reflection question, and then answer it in a way that we could, again, engage and share your comments. Okay, looking at that, let's move forward. And the first comment that I read goes with this piece around connecting and building a culture of sustainability. And that is with the communication and the data sharing. And those practices put us in a place where we're collaborating together. So under this bullet of building a culture of sustainability, first we have to know that we're bringing the environmental, social, and economic factors together. I said earlier that one of the comments that just resonated was that we build these effective, responsive systems. So as educators, we recognize that schools do not operate as in isolation or as silos. It's a comprehensive approach. What's happening in the environment? What social factors? What economic factors? What do we need to do to sustain that we have decision-making that's constantly responsive to the education, social, emotional, economic factors that are impacting our scholars and our staff? And it benefits us to have that mindset that we're bringing this all together. And then also looking at the comment, I see that one of the responses says that we have to have a clear vision, mutual understanding, and communication. Having that sense of vision, mutual understanding lends itself again to this social part of the environment. So that I said I'm a partnership approach leader. That means that I treat everyone with equity, equality. So I treat them as humans, meaning they have voice, they have choice. So they have to have understanding. With that is dialogue. So it's so critical, again, that as we think about how we stay focused is, again, bringing the environment together in a way that we're considering what happens outside the school is going to impact the inside of the school, and so on and so forth. The second part of this culture of sustainability is developing the champions across all levels. We asked before, what does that collaboration look like? Well, it looks like we're collaborating with businesses, nonprofits, governmental agencies, so on and so forth. Why? Because of the economic disparities, because of the input that we need from our local business partners, from our community members, our nonprofits, of what they want to see and how they will partner with us around closing these gaps or preparing our students for the next level of learning, but also opportunities outside of the school to be impactful in their next career, but also in any job or industry they go into after year 12 or 14 if they have some college or career while they're inside of high school. But also thinking about that, we're bringing these agencies together because social challenges. We want to ensure that our scholars are prepared to make sure that they have grit. As right now, we have a lot of, that could be conflicts that are happening. Do our children have those social skills where they know conflict resolution? Some of those skills where they know how to make great decision makings, pros and cons, all those strategies you could teach them. But this is really developing those champions so that as we're working around sustainability in the school, by partnering with all of these businesses, nonprofits, parents, so on and so forth, we really create these sustainable practices. And then lastly, it breaks down the silos between systems, processes, and people. So we know that we have to have these things in place, but central office, the teachers, the principals, we don't all operate in isolation. We partner together. And with that partnership approach, we have an aligned vision, strategy, and an implementation that sustains student success over time. So I'm excited again. I just read another comment. It talks about, I'll go back to it, and it says right here, we're establishing a culture that supports all members of the educational community for from a well-being standpoint. And that is for the benefit of our scholars. So Dr. Lewis, what would you add as a commentary to your experience around building a culture of sustainability?
Yes, and I'll just piggyback on because I know I'm going to pivot to questions, the last one around silos. Many districts across the country, and I've actually had opportunity to work with several districts, and silos is something that continues to come up as individuals are working and don't get me wrong, doing a great job in the responsibility of the things that they've been hired to do. But we have to, just as Dr. Blair mentioned, in addition to the vision and strategy, we have to be able to look at how our teams are working cross-functionally to ensure that those goals are not only being achieved, but that they're being coordinated across different departments and community groups, because we have to be able to work hand in hand. We just can't have, I guess I would say, where each of us, we do our individual parts, and then we think it all comes together and make the perfect birthday cake, right? At the end of the day, like, we all have to be hands on deck supporting our students and understanding how we support other departments to make sure that the vision of the organization is moving forward every day. Because if you're going to really talk about sustainability, that means that individuals knows exactly who to go to be able to solve problems versus someone above them pulling everyone in the room. And so as we can get to a place of growing our teams and our educators to understand not only their roles, but how we all work together for the overall betterment of our students. And again, as we think about just our mission that we have as educators each and every day to ensure that our students are not only attending schools, but they're thriving and moving on to the next level.
Right. And Dr. Lewis, I will add, you just brought something to my mind, and you and I often reflect on sustainability as it relates to growth within our organizations from that upward mobility. We're thinking about, we have principals who are now aspiring to go outside of their buildings to become district staff or network staff. And we have people in the building that are aspiring from that teacher leader in the classroom that wants to become that educator, assistant principal, or what have you. So in this sense of focusing on people and looking at the data and looking at this sustainability, we want to ensure that we're modeling and paying that forward consistently. So as we're talking about the environment of, how, practices come together across systems, but also how do we ensure that we're mentoring others? And Dr. Lewis said it earlier, he's a champion for mentorship, so that our people that go into these principal roles aren't half-baked, that our directors at the central office have the experiences and the credibility, this body of evidence that I call it, that they can be practitioners with expertise. So a part of that culture of sustainability is practices that ensure students are successful and our scholars are very successful, but also practices as leaders that we're modeling and giving opportunities and experiences to those leaders that are coming behind us to ensure that they are prepared and that, again, they have a safe space to practice, but also they have evidence-based, research-based experiences from us that translate to real actions that they would take in their buildings, in their districts, so that they're impactful. And again, they pay that and lead it forward consistently. And we're building this sense of sustainability so that our organizations are stronger over time, that our schools, not only individually, but collectively, the network or the district moves, because we have this culture of leadership development that really considers people, individuals, but also their profession is important to our growth as leaders, and we have to consider that. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know we talk about sustainability a lot, and to ensure that everyone at every level is prepared and effective. And as we know, educators are transitioning out of education quicker in terms of not working 30, 40 years as some of our, educators did that taught us. But we want to make sure that if a principal is hired, that principal is ready to be principal day one. If you go into a director's role, you're ready to be a director. You may not know everything about your position as director, but you know how to lead and effectively partner with people in your department to be strategic and move forward the district's plans or whatever it is for your department. So I just wanted to add that. And now we'll turn it over to Robert if we have any questions and Q&A before we close out our segment.
Thank you, gentlemen. One of the questions that came up is, you talked a lot about mentoring and basically building your own capacity for your future leaders in your buildings. How are you using, are there specific data points that you're utilizing to identify those individuals who have that potential to stand out from the get-go? And then those who have the desire, are there specific strategies you use to coach those individuals to get them ready, as you said, day one ready?
Yes. So I would say, when I was a superintendent, for example, there were many individuals in entry-level positions, right? And we had opportunities for advancement. And so we would take, and I would take as well as a superintendent, time out with my employees to understand, okay, you're doing this job today, like, what's next for you? Like, what do you really want to do? And in some of those conversations, you hear individuals, I want to move up in the organization. I want to become a director. I want to become a chief one day, right? And be able to support them in those efforts, whether it is in addition to mentorship directly within the organization, allow them to participate in other fellowship programs as well. So that's one side of how I supported individuals. But then because of the network and you are able to meet individuals, especially during my time as superintendent, visited schools, meeting different leaders. And I can give one example, went to a graduation and the principal of a particular school, she walked over to me, she greeted me. And at the same time, she brought someone with her and she said, he wants your job one day, right? And so that actually became a connection. And then beyond that connection, I've been mentoring that individual since that happened when I first started back in 2015. And so again, there are multiple ways that these mentorship relationships happen. Again, organically, how do they happen within the organization? But then because of networks and meeting and talking with individuals, sometimes those things actually happen organically.
Right. And Robert, can I add this as well? When you asked around the data point, what do we look at? I used the word earlier, praxis. Sometimes we only know that because we take these exams to become certified. But I take that meaning what you do in your craft as an educator, meaning maybe you're the classroom teacher or you're the assistant principal or you're the principal. And what I'm looking for is someone to own their praxis and know what the outcomes look like for success. I know that when you see a classroom teacher that owns how to be an effective teacher, spending time learning the content, learning how to plan, understanding students, getting to know them, they're owning their praxis and they get evidence and outcomes. That stands out as a data point that they may be ready. In addition to being a part of programs where they may have taken some ownership of doing things outside their classroom, like leading other departments or, not just fundraisers, but things in the school. So I'm looking for individuals that are owning their praxis. If you're a principal and you own what it really means to be an effective principal and you're moving the data regarding academics, discipline, whatever those data points are, that stands out to me as someone who's taking the time to improve, to get better, and looking for that opportunity to say, I now have a body of experience from that classroom, a body of evidence, whatever that is. To me, that stands out as someone who's ready for the next level. But also, I know with those types of individuals that own their praxis, they're teachable and they're coachable. So data for me goes back to praxis. Are you improving it? And is there a body of work within your current role that we can say will push you forward and make you ready for the next level?
Absolutely. One last thing, and then we'll have to wrap up for the day, is, we have to admit that our country's in some turbulent times right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people are afraid right now. When we get into these whitewater phases, it becomes difficult for a lot of leaders to maintain focused on the most important thing, and that is our students. If you could just give 10, 15 seconds of how do you keep your staff to maintain that focus and hope to provide the best they can for our learners.
I'll go first. So the first thing I'll say to that is, as I opened earlier today, as educators, we always have gone through challenging times, And so the first thing is, as a leader, try to support the people in their building or in the overall school system, it's going to be important to understand how that work is happening every single day. And if there's systems and structures in place that to keep the organization moving forward, even when it's not such a bad time, because it's very difficult if things are not going well, when we're not talking about the things you're mentioning, Robert, at the time, and then you want to keep people focused. If they're not focused every day, they definitely won't be able to be able to focus during very turbulent times. And so again, in those situations, you have some individuals, but if you want an organization to be able to respond in this moment here, we also have to look at what's happening day to day within that organization. So when turbulent time, and for me, as you're saying, it total different situation. But when COVID-19 happened, right, we were able to pivot really, really fast and keep everyone focused on the mission at hand, which was the safety of our students, being able to provide food and education for our students and move forward with that. But we were moving in that way anyway. right? And so it made us easy to stay focused and not get lost in, okay, how do we respond to COVID-19 and move forward in our district? So a very different situation than you're describing. But again, as educators, we have always gone through these turbulent times and different situations throughout the years and decades.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's maintaining focus on the systems.
Yes. And if you don't have them, it's very hard to maintain focus on it.
Yes, yeah. And I would add, when you think about the scholars themselves, I still use the word all the time around equality, right? That means that you treat people like they're human, right? When we think about students, they come to school with so many things that we have to consider, know, and understand. And sometimes we lose sight of the small things that happens with scholars because we almost dehumanize them because we have so much to do, right? We get so busy. So Robert, one of the things is to always remember as an educator, our scholars, as well as anyone in your building, they're human. So they deserve empathy, understanding, and an opportunity. And I often think about whenever I got where I felt like I was just busy, go visit a kindergarten classroom. You see the joy, the passion, the excitement, because those children haven't been brainwashed yet. They're not like little robots. They're just bouncing around with that energy and love. And it reminds you of how we need to be empathetic to children, but also empathetic to that child that's in my 12th grader, empathetic to that same childlike behavior that's inside of my 7th grader. So that I understand if it is a social, emotional, and academic, I'm treating this child with humanity. So in the environment of all of the noise, what keeps me focused on that is to understand that these children are humans and that the people I'm working with are humans and that life will impact them. And how do I positively intersect with them so that they move further, whatever the situation is with the child in the classroom or the educator that's teaching in that classroom.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you. That's a great way to wrap it up. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. My email's here if you'd like to reach out and connect. We can set you up. And if you're interested in meetings individually with either Dr. Lewis or Dr. Blair, I can help coordinate that for you. You will be getting a recording of this. You'll be getting a link probably tomorrow. I appreciate you all. And I just want to, again, thank you all for your attendance, your participation. Dr. Lewis, Dr. Blair, thank you again for your willingness to do this and shedding light on what's really important in education today.
All right, thank
you
you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.